we can create a Eurasian home. This was the whole promise and this is in my most recent book, Provoked. The whole promise at the end of the Cold War was, as Bush, and this is why I was a New World Order kook, by the way, was because Bush Sr. said, we want to create a single security system from Vancouver to Vladivostok, right? That's the far east of Russia there. Yeah. So in other words, what I thought he meant was like bringing Russia into NATO.
How do you keep your power in the world if you retreat from everything?
Oh, well, that's the whole point, is abandon that power in the world. We don't need that power in the world.
We don't. To have the freedom that we have, we don't need to be able to have power in the world that includes also having some economic might so that we can have, you know, advantage in trade and things like that.
Look, if you need your government to rig the game for you so that you can get artificially cheap labor, or so that you can have some local government expropriate property and turn it over to your buddies, and your standard of living depends on that, and then that's wrong and unacceptable and so tough. Like, you're going to have to pay more for grapes then if you're using state power to take unfair advantage in order to get artificial low prices on whatever it is. So that's that. And it's not isolationism to have private corporations have international trade around the world. You know, to have, you know, in fact, our current empire has sanctions on probably 2/3 of the countries in the world. And then they call the free traders the isolationists just because we don't want to exert government power around the world. But why is it just built in? We're supposed to assume forever that America must be the dominant power in Italy and Germany and France and Britain. Why? They can't solve their own problems. This is the era of totalitarians from 100 years ago, where it's the commies versus the Nazis and all of this stuff. Or no, it's not actually at all. If America retreated from Europe and pulled our troops out of there, then Germany and France and Britain would create an EU army. They'd have a deal with Poland and Italy and whatever.
You think it would take care of itself?
And it would take care of itself. We've had the OSCE and all these organizations all of this time. We don't need to be, and look at who runs Germany now. Would Germany be the dominant power in Europe? Sure. Does that mean they'd have to go to war with Russia next? No. In fact, that's America and Britain's greatest fear, is that Germany and Russia will get along too well. That's what we got to prevent. Merkel and Putin want to do a Eurasian home. We got to intervene to destabilize that, blow that thing up, prevent that kind of deal from happening. So, and then the same thing for Japan and China. Now, there's, in Korea for that matter, there's plenty of historical problems going back there. And you could argue that Japan right now doesn't have nukes because we're there and we do have nukes, and they're like, they have a security guarantee from us. On the other hand, the Chinese aren't making any threatening moves towards Japan. They're not sending any signals to Tokyo. They're like, yeah, you better be on your best behavior, any kind of thing. So the Japanese are not militarizing any more than what the Americans are insisting on. But they have no particular agenda to militarize against China. And the Chinese don't seem to be trying to pick that fight at all. So maybe now would be a good time for America to broker a permanent, treaty of friendship and understanding between China and Japan to freeze things as they are, to hold tensions where they are and prevent them from escalating so that they can get on without us. And we're in debt $37 trillion. How many more $1 trillion can we borrow from South Korea and Japan and China so that we can be the dominant military power, keeping them from fighting each other? It seems like there's got to be a better way to do this. Yeah. You know what I mean? It seems like it's always built in that, like, yeah, but if we didn't dominate East Asia, then East Asians would. And then that would be a crisis for some reason. And I'm not saying that America can just pull the tablecloth out and all the glasses will be perfect.
I understand.
But we can move cautiously and deliberately and negotiate deals. And we can create a Eurasian home. This was the whole promise and this is in my most recent book, Provoked. The whole promise at the end of the Cold War was, as Bush, and this is why I was a New World Order kook, by the way, was because Bush Sr. said, we want to create a single security system from Vancouver to Vladivostok, right? That's the far east of Russia there.
Yeah.
So in other words, what I thought he meant was like bringing Russia into NATO and making a one world white army of the North to then lord it over China and Islamic South Asia. And there was a lot of talk like that. The thing is, they were just bluffing. They didn't mean that. Mostly they were saying those things in order to, for American domestic consumption, to bring the more like humanitarian intervention minded liberal Democrat types along. But then on the international level, more importantly, to get the Soviets and then later the Russians to acquiesce to America staying in Germany and then expanding their influence into Eastern Europe, that you're all going to be a part of it too. You're going to see, we already have the OSCE and we're all members of it. So we're going to replace NATO with the OSCE. And then so that way, yeah, Ukraine will be a member, but so will Russia be a member. And all of the members, all the states in between. And so there'll be no problem, nothing to fight about there. But they were lying the whole time. And as I show in the book, and I cite other great scholars who demonstrate that they knew that they were lying and that they were telling the Russians in the Bush senior administration, the promise was they do this with the OSCE, what was then called the CSCE, the conference. And now it's the Organization on Cooperation International Security.
Close enough. Yeah.
I had it a second ago and it flew away. And then in the Clinton years, it was the Partnership for Peace, but they were lying both times. And it was the plan always was to expand NATO, not to erase the dividing lines in Europe, but to move them further east, right up to Russia's border. And then what are they going to do about it? And then now we see what they're going to do about it. And which was long predicted, by the way, too, that all the hawks, as I show in my books, all the hawks who were responsible for all of our worst policies, they all knew better all along, and they all said so all along. Boy, we better not do the stupid thing that we want to do because you know what's going to happen. And then they do it, and then that thing happens. And it's kind of an unbroken chain. And then so I don't have to quote all the good guys. I can quote the bad guys themselves describing their own worst behavior.
Well, that's the thing, though. Like, you keep coming back to this USSR Russia example, and it's actually a really prescient one, because I think it's fair to say there were a fuck ton of mistakes made throughout the Cold War, not the least of which is wars that happened all in the middle of it on in proximity to this East versus West disagreement that was going on. You also had damn near, potential nuclear holocaust scenarios. So a lot could have gone wrong that, even some things, thank God it didn't. That said, what's always stood out to me about the end of it is that the way that the USSR eventually fell was that it was an ideological game. You basically got enough information in there, talking about from like the West perspective. You got enough information inside of the Soviet Union to get 15% of the population. That's all it was, 15%, to be like, yo, fuck this, and then effectively overthrow the government. So you would think, oh my God, you did something without like actually intervening. It worked out. This government that you didn't like is overthrown. Now let's work with the rebuild. But to your point, it's like we learned zero lessons, because in the rebuild, we made promises that we didn't keep. We gave them, meaning Russia, we gave them ideas that they were going to be a part of things that then they weren't a part of. We set up a new type of iron curtain. It just had like a nice like red curtain around it too, so that it seemed like it was like pleasant. And we effectively created a vacuum in the 90s for a guy like Putin to then take power and decide we're gonna make this, instead of USSR left, it's kind of gonna be like more fascist Russia, right? And so in a lot of ways, like, I'm not saying the U.S. should be blamed for every decision that Vladimir Putin makes or anything, but it's hard for me to not look at it and wonder if our very own, like, stabbing ourselves in the back created it.
The truth comes out. Julian DOREY ghost wrote my most recent book, Provoked. And that's the story of the book, dude.
That's I summarized it effectively.
That's it. Yeah, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is what I was trying to say when my brain wasn't working earlier.
Gotcha.
And yeah, that was exactly the deal. Was, yeah, you're going to be part of this whole thing. Then yeah, nah. And now the one place I would differ with you is that the end of the Cold War in the Soviet Union really wasn't about us, and it wasn't an achievement of the CIA and the NED. It was really what happened was the economic system in the country had just ground essentially to a halt. And the new leadership decided that they needed to try to emulate the West some and reform the economy some in order to try to get it moving again. But the problem was you can't really half-ass communism in the way that they tried to half-ass it. And it just made it even worse. Like, for example, instead of having just the central commissar run all the industry in this district, they devolved control, but not ownership, down to the managers of each firm. So then those guys could just loot all the stuff and take all the money and run, this kind of thing.
Yes.
So it was just, so once they started trying to fix it, they just made it worse and worse and worse.
Right.
And then idiot Gorbachev tried to outlaw vodka, and, he did his own prohibition. People never mentioned this part of it, but this was a huge part of the reason why FDR was elected 4 times, was he was the guy who re-legalized drinking. God help us all ever since then because of him. But that was what he did. And so this was a huge thing that undermined his rule. And then you just had a new young generation of KGB guys, I think, who wanted to overthrow the old system and take control of the new one.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.